Well, welcome back to the Coaching Lab podcast. I'm Lee Baker, your host for today's episode. And today's episode is all about travel, but not the kind we usually associate with rest and relaxation. We're talking about the kind of travel that's fast-paced, often work-related, and can leave you feeling a little more depleted than refreshed. While being on the road for work can be exciting and energizing, it can also be incredibly disruptive to our routines, our sleep, our energy, and our overall well-being. So how do you stay grounded and take care of your body and your energy to actually perform your best when you're constantly on the go? To help us explore that, I'm joined by Beth Jennings and Brad Cooper, both PTs, and Beth is a national board certified health and wellness coach who specializes in helping professionals thrive while on the road. Speaking of travel, if you're looking for a way to engage with intention this fall, we'd love for you to join us at the Rocky Mountain Coaching Retreat and Symposium in Estes Park in September. You can learn more at catalystcoachinginstitute.com/retreat. And if you're someone who travels a lot for work or who works with those who do and are curious about what adjustments can be explored to live well and feel your best, you're in the right place for today's episode. Well, Beth, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for being here. I'm excited about this conversation. Yes, I'm excited about this conversation because I used to travel a lot for work, and I found that this was a disruptive component of my life. So I'm excited to dive into things. And kicking things off, you are a physical therapist by trade and also a national board certified health and wellness coach. So I'm curious how your perspective on well-being has evolved within that and how travel or frequent travel fits into that picture.
Sure. It's a great question. I started out as exercise physiology major and then PT school. So my brain was very and I was a high school athlete and an exerciser. And so my brain was very exercise oriented as a focus on wellness and, throw in the good nutrition and some sleep. And none of that's necessarily wrong, but it was incomplete for sure. There's so much more to wellness that as I became a PT, worked with patients, really saw some differences in folks beyond the formula of go home and do this program 2 to 3 times a week, get these stretches in, get this program in. And certainly I had great examples of longevity with folks as well that supported that. I had this great patient from Alaska in his late 70s who was no longer cross-country skiing from Anchorage to Nome or somewhere, camping along the way, until he shifted to something else because his friends were worried about him. That certainly supported the exercise component. He was very healthy into his older years. But I also saw with patients how much mindset really mattered, how much they brought to a session as far as how much they wanted to put into the efforts and how much stress was in their lives, whether they showed up with a liter bottle of diet soda, all these other things that I really started seeing the folks who were doing better and maybe those who were struggling. Now, of course, mindset doesn't heal a torn meniscus or a rotator cuff tear. But it certainly helps you show up and those, and do the work and do the things you need to do. And so it was really interesting to start really looking at some of those things and seeing the differences in folks as part of the wellness picture and as part of healing in PT. And personally, I did a lot of travel personally between leisure travel, but also as a contract physical therapist, short-term contracts for about 3 months long. Typically, I traveled the country at one point for a block of 4.5 years solid. And then I did some things back and forth. And it was really when I ended up doing a contract in Antarctica where I deployed for 5 months in a place where fresh fruits and vegetables aren't in great supply. It's 24-hour sunlight. It's, and I came back from that trip, amazing trip, had a great time, worked really hard, 54-hour work week, took advantage of lots of the leisure things in the background and around those work schedules that happen, and just came back feeling terrible. Really came back, my body hurt, my gut wasn't happy. And as much as it's, you got to do what you got to do as Antarctica, you don't get a chance to go back. That part's fine, but I decided to go back again. And I decided, like, no, I can't, like, this isn't a long-term plan. I travel a lot. What is the way to keep things, keep my body feeling good, keeping my mindset instead of just tear it up, recover, tear it up, recover. And I think of that with my clients as well. Some folks are long-term travelers, and wellness is something that you can do on the road. Sorry, that was a really long story.
But you must do. It doesn't come along with it. Travel does not mean health and well-being. And you made that point in saying I went back to the same place and I changed the way I approached it. And that's why you're here today, is to share, look, you can travel in quotes and it can be a disaster, or you can travel intentionally and it can be a healthy approach to life. So I think it's a great story to set the stage.
Yeah, and it was a really telling time for me to reflect on what can I do, because it was pretty, it's a pretty extreme example.
The emphasis on what can I do, not what can I do?
Yeah.
It's the same question.
Yep.
I hear this all the time in all aspects of life. Well, what can I do? That's the right question said the wrong way. It's what can I do?
Exactly.
Anyway, soapbox. Exactly. Sorry, I'll put it aside.
It goes back to mindset, which Beth brought up, right?
Yeah. Psychology of our physiology.
Yep. Yeah. So, Beth, when you think about Anchorage and when people travel, they offer picture like relaxation and rejuvenation, right? And even if they're like traveling for work in beautiful places, there's this expectation of like, man, I need to take full advantage of this. And it tends to come at the expense sometimes, and we learn the hard way about our health. Like we do change, I feel like, our routines because we're just in a different environment. So I do, and when people travel for work, I think that you've got that, like, you got to find, I don't want to say balance, but like you've got to live in the moment and also take care of yourself and have a good idea of what that looks like. So like that you went back and did it differently. Like I'm curious, like from your perspective, how would you describe well-being while traveling? Like when you went back and changed kind of your approach, what looked different? How would you define it now versus the first time you did it?
So, yeah, and people travel in so many different ways. But yeah, to use my example, when I went back to Antarctica, I had a plan food-wise. I had a plan exercise-wise, and I had a plan stress management-wise, staying connected to community and stress. And I thought about it ahead of time. I'm a big proponent of planning, thinking it through. Everything's, not going to go perfectly whatsoever. But I thought through, I had the experience of the location already. And so I looked at what can I ship down to myself? We can mail things to ourselves. So I, supplements, green drinks, even some canned foods that I can make some healthy thing, so I made some plans. Then there's access to fitness centers and gyms, and I was able to, exercise is something I know well. So I just needed to make sure I made the space for it. And how was I going to do that? And so it was just a lot of different ways to plan. And similarly with clients, what is the gap for you? And some of those, where do you feel like, well, for one, I feel like decisions around sleep. Sleep is where things start. So really protecting that as much as possible. And that's usually one of the biggest things I like to talk about.
It's not just about packing your bags and hitting the road. It's intention, planning, and you bring up sleep as one of the things that does feel disruptive when you travel. You're not in your own bed. You're in a different environment. I feel like people do bring that up in conversation when they travel, especially for work, of like, I'm in a hotel. I'm sleeping like crud, and I wake up feeling exhausted, and then I have a continental breakfast, right? And then I'm feeling drained because I haven't had good energy. Where else do you see, well-being and health disrupted when it comes to travel?
I had a conversation with one person recently where they talked about their travel was so frequent. They're single. They have a connection of friends and family back home. in their home base, but they were losing their connections with people so much because everybody just assumed they were out of town. This was somebody that did contract work for 3 months, 6 months at a time. And, even though, they might say, hey, I'm going to be in town this winter, or hey, and nobody called them. And so there's a certain amount of loneliness that can tick in, or folks who have family at home, kids at home, and that connection struggles a little bit as well because you're gone and on the road so much. And so, we like to think about, the food and the sleep and the exercise and all those, main pillars, but there's also that connection, your community and your people and your loneliness on the road as well.
What strategies have you found most helpful? Like as you're talking with clients around connection, what strategies would you recommend when people are traveling and feeling isolated and how to engage with connection?
Yeah, and it depends on, who your people are and where they are. A Sunday night call. I did that in Antarctica. I had a good friend back home. We had a standing call every Sunday night at a certain time and, chatted for a little bit. I had one client talk about, a nightly call to their kids, at bedtime. It was a 10-minute, but making the plans based on things like that fit your needs. Sometimes you're part of a traveling therapist network. There's lots of ways to connect with other healthcare travelers on the road. Like, hey, I'm going to be in San Diego for the next 3 months on, a Facebook page, who else is there? So, everybody's needs are a little different based on what works for them.
And Beth, I noticed something when I was traveling a lot. I used to do a lot of speaking around the country, and Suzanne and I would have two different types of calls, and it was the penalty or the tax, the travel tax was all on me. I noticed if I was doing it as a box checking activity, I need to check in with Suze, let's do a quick call. But the football game was on in the background, muted, and my computer was open over on the bed and whatever. Then she knew, we both knew this was Brad checking a box versus this is my Susanna time. And for the TV is off, the computer is closed, the books are closed. This is just as if we were sitting across the table from one another. I wouldn't be looking at the television, I hope. So I wonder if there's some tips along those lines on the connection side for folks to fully engage. And then these days when people are kind of like, why are you calling me instead of texting? I love your idea of having a Sunday night call or could you check in tomorrow night? Are there other tips along those lines and I'd love to kind of address this from two sides. And I know Lee's going to get into this, but we've been talking mainly about the extended stay that you're doing as a PT or the consultant that's on the road every single Sunday night through Thursday night. But maybe we could simultaneously hit the 1 week vacation, the 1 week work travel, the 2 week. So we're kind of hitting both sides of that as we go.
Sure. Well, you certainly hit one of the main points is being present and really taking that, you're not catching the ride share to the airport and checking. I mean, if that's what you have to do to get some business done with your partner or whatever, that's fine. But when you can slice out those moments where you can shut everything down, that is the biggest one. That is the biggest one for sure. And, anything else that's kind of individual to what works for you and the other person, I think that all comes down to the relationship you have, and sometimes it's also connections to people in the towns that you might be visiting as well, and just making old friend connections. Yeah, I've done that on a couple occasions. I do some travel for work as well, and it's in that bank of, 2 to 4 days typically. And, connecting with hey, I'm going to be in St. Louis for a couple of days. Anybody around, anybody free? I have a couple, when you work in Antarctica, you end up with friends kind of all over the country. So, connecting with old friends as well is another one, and going out to eat and seeing somebody you haven't seen in 20 years. And then your other piece of it, you said something about the leisure travel and the 1 week and the connections around that. I think the shorter ones have less impact unless you're just doing them repetitively, one after another, the 1 week here and 1 week there. But yeah, I think some of the ideas are still there in the same way. It depends on, if you're on your own, are you needing the stress relief and a check-in with mom or a check-in with your partner, and figuring out a communication style but your best avenue to connect. So both of you understand like, hey, this travel's fun, but I might need to check in. And both sides of this, the conversation is about like, hey, I'm not checking in to see if you picked up the trash, or took the trash out to the curb. Right. This is also me just grounding and being based in like, this is who I am at home. I'm taking this with me.
This is cake, not icing.
Yeah, exactly.
Brad, you did bring up a good point about, I think, length of work travel, because, I was thinking about when I used to travel for work, how it was once a quarter, but it would be for like a week. Because, like I had to fly somewhere, I had a travel day, I had 3 days doing coaching visits, at a center. And then I'd travel home. So I'd have, so it's basically 5 days on the road, but it was only once a quarter. So it didn't feel like I was doing it every week, but it felt disruptive because I wasn't in the rhythm. And I have talked to a few clients in the past where they travel every single week for work. And they're almost like, Lee, I've got my rhythm. Like I have my same hotel, or like, I've got my things, and they feel almost, and I don't want to blanket it, because I think some people feel disrupted in this too, but like they feel more equipped because it's more of a routine for them versus like once a quarter. If I'm uplifting my routine for a week, I'm like, okay, how do I uplift and change my routine for a week and then go back into my flow for another 3 months and then do this all over again? Because it doesn't feel routine to me, right? So I wonder if I know we talked a little bit about sleep and nutrition and how those are kind of like the pillars. What would you say in terms, I want to dive into sleep a little bit, because I do think that that's one that comes up a lot. And people are like, Beth, I know, those are the things I quote unquote should be doing and have a handle on, and I don't when I travel once a quarter. What would your recommendations be there if we're doing that kind of intermittent travel approach?
Sure. And it depends too on how much is related to jet lag. Are you changing time zones, or are you just, in the same time zone?
Let's hit them both. Let's talk about a 2-hour shift each way. So let's go 2 hours east, 2 hours west, and maybe start there, Lee, and then maybe we can build off of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it comes down to those sleep habits that they call sleep hygiene habits, and really packing with you some things to be successful. If you're I've become an eye mask wearer. I didn't think I'd ever become someone that wears an eye mask. And I am surprised how much blocking everything out really makes a difference. So I'm a proponent of eye masks. Take
Folks,
earplugs.
That's the biggest ROI you will ever get in your life. They're $5, and if you go buy one, there's nothing to lose. Goodness sakes.
And earbuds,
sleep buds.
Those are. Yeah. Oh, I haven't tried those.
Oh, but yeah. Greatest product, health and wellness ever created.
And so these are simple, at least the cheap ones off of Amazon for a couple bucks, those are so simple. If you don't like those on your face, then, deal with light like it's a drug. Light, how it's going to wake you up, and it's going to tell you when it's time to go to sleep. So protecting your sleep in general, schedule-wise, wind down time, all of those things, but using daylight, as soon as you get up in the morning, assuming you're in a place that has light, time of year that has light in the morning, if not, turn the room lights on. Getting that in the first little bit of sleep or a little bit of waking is going to help wake you up. Start winding down, no caffeine for about 6 hours before you want to go to sleep. Start dimming the lights. Get away from the tech about a half an hour beforehand, and have a plan for what you're going to do in that time at the end of the evening. Everybody just scrolls on their phone, turns the TV on, and, have something non-tech and be ready. Are you going to stretch? Are you going to, do some gentle journaling or reading or something from a magazine? But having a plan for that and just, working around those basic sleep hygiene. Have a cool, dark, comfortable place to sleep. When you're on the road, you may not like pillows. Some people take a little pillowcase with lavender on it in their protect, kind of whatever, depending on how challenging sleep is for you. The tools can get a little more diverse.
I love that. Treat light as a drug. I wrote that down. I love that phrase. A lot of good tips there. Let's lean into one and then the other. So let's go west to east. It's midnight, but at home it's 10. In where you are, it's day one. Could you walk us through what you would do day one that might be different than day two? And then is it, home free after day two? What would be your strategy going that direction with these things?
Well, when it comes to about a 2-hour time difference, I'm not saying reset your clock unless you found with overtime that feels better for you. It's when it gets a little bit, and you're staying for longer periods, and it depends also on, what do you have to do for your schedule? And, I do things where I have to be ready at 7 a.m. and my body clock says it's 5 a.m. So I am trying to go to bed the night before. So I'm not even starting day one. I'm starting travel minus 2 days, travel minus 1 day. I might even just make sure I'm getting to bed on time. The greater the time change difference, the more I'm prepping ahead of time. So if it's more of a 2-hour time difference, I may not do that, but I am sure I'm going to make sure I'm getting to bed at my normal time. I'm waking up in the morning. I drink tea. I'm not a coffee drinker. So I use a little caffeine to get me going in the morning. I'm always drinking water. I've got 16 ounces of water to get me up and going. Travel is hydrating. It's going to also help boost your energy to get you up and going. So getting yourself hydrated in the morning. And then the rest is more nighttime routine oriented and starting to wind down when you feel, again, I'm not sure if I'm going to shift my time clock for 2 hours. If it's a short trip,
let's stay on that because I think that's a great distinction. 2 days in, out, meeting, speech, or whatever. That's one thing. Stay on the same time zone. You're saying that makes sense. Is it
if you can?
Is it 7 days or is it 4? Is it day 4 where you start to shift? Where do you begin that shift, or do you never entirely shift? You kind of go halfway. Okay, instead of my old 9 would be 11, or my old 10 would be midnight. I'm gonna go till 11. I'm not gonna shift all the way. Like where is your? And I know there's not a right answer, but how do you approach this?
When I start going to 3 hours. And it's 3 days or more. That's kind of my personal cutoff.
So 2 hours, you don't do anything different.
I do things different because I usually have to be up early in the morning and I want to be bright for that. So I am shifting a little bit, but I'm not trying to shift my whole time clock over. Yeah. So I am, more or less going to bed when I'm tired. Probably going to be a little bit different on either end, but for a short time period, 2 days, I'm not doing as much. I'm just maximizing sunlight and hydration and things like that. But once I get to, 3 days or more, or if you're talking like a 6-hour time difference, an 8-hour time difference, I am shifting, for that, unless it is, less than 2 days. I do the best I can. I don't do as many of those big jumps anymore. So, but for my clients, for sure, like if you are going to jump, you're going to do Pacific Coast to a London trip. And you want to start a couple days ahead of time and see if you can, if life allows that, to start shifting your nighttime bedtime and early wake time, maybe 2 days before, start shifting. And then you start using, the lights in the morning or turning lights on, maybe even wearing sunglasses in the evening and helping you shut down a little bit, using that light as a drug again. That's where your melatonin is kicking in and out as the light comes into your eyes. So that's going to be what helps to regulate that rhythm, that sleep rhythm, your circadian rhythm.
But I like that we're walking through this, and I'm trying to think about it from a listener perspective. If they're like, okay, Beth's telling me to kind of adjust my circadian rhythm and like clock, depending on if we're like 2 hours plus of a time zone difference for an extended period of time to shift it. And they're like, great. Now it's 8 p.m. and my, colleagues are wanting to have drinks at the hotel bar, and I'm like bumping up against my, time to go to bed. But like that is the area that gets so challenging for people to like have that boundary, especially with sleep and maybe some of these other habits, but just to like communicate that, not only for themselves, but like those around them, and like saying no to the extra drink at the bar, or saying no to some of those things that allow them to have opportunity for this. So I'm curious, Beth, what you recommend, in those situations of how to navigate that kind of stuff to help people feel more confident.
Yeah, and it depends on the priority, and it depends on, like some of these evening events are part of, sales and networking, and you have to go to them. And so it might be, a boundary that is not the perfect boundary, but it's what's going to have to work, and that's okay. So it's going to be, listen, or, a banquet or something in the evening where, it goes till midnight. This is what I'm going to do. There are discussions around anchoring your sleep no matter what, and say you preserve, and the ideal is 7 to 8, 7 to 9 hours a night, and that's not always realistic on some trips with the examples that we just cited. So some folks talk about anchoring, midnight to 4 is protected no matter what. Or you pick 2 to 8 is going to be protected no matter what. If I can get to bed earlier, great. If I can sleep in an hour later, great. But sometimes you have to make some balance in there, just because work doesn't always dictate. You don't always have the perfect scenarios.
Right. Some things we can control and some things we can't. When it comes to nutrition, I'm curious, I know we talked a lot about sleep and circadian rhythm and time zone changes. And we're on this idea that like, if we have to have a non-negotiable of like 2 to 8 or 12 to 4 for sleep, what are some of the other health habits that can maybe offset something, like some maybe more unhealthy things that are happening with sleep, right? If we're getting 4 hours of sleep, what's my like biggest bang for my buck then? If I'm like, okay, I'm getting 4 hours of sleep, although we know that's like, ideally, you want to be getting more. What can help me feel my best in that moment, kind of thing? Like, what else can I do?
Well, and if you're going to get 4 hours, let's get quality 4 hours. So, sleeping well may entail those tools we talked about earlier, the mask and the earplugs. So you're not interrupted during the 4 hours, or you're, maybe even a white noise machine or something else. And so making sure the quality is there. Some people supplement with melatonin to make sure they go down at the time they want to start winding down. And then, again, boosting as needed sunlight, darkness. Some folks who wear sunglasses at night, you think they're, too cool for school, but it's, it might be part of them helping, wearing a mask on your Lyft ride home, or, something like that. So that when you do get home, you are ready to check out and sleep for a bit.
Quick comment on melatonin, because I know there's a lot of stuff out there. We've looked into it quite a bit. The over-the-counter from the grocery store is generally in 5 to 10 milligram doses. And folks, we've had sleep experts, multiple on the podcast, that have clarified 1 milligram is the optimal, or even I'm currently taking 1/3 of 1 milligram, like literally taking those 1 milligrams and cutting them with a knife and using that with my sleep. So look into the data. We're not here to give you nutrition advice. We're not here to pretend that we know all the science behind melatonin, but the sleep experts we've had have been very clear that what you get at the store, and Americans are used to more is better, what you get at the store is way more and not helpful in the least. Step back to the data. It's 1 milligram. It's probably less than 1 milligram. So just a side comment there, since we were talking about melatonin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great.
So for someone who's heading on about a busy travel, what would you say are some realistic habits they can support their well-being? They can support their well-being before they start. Because I know, Beth, you brought this up earlier where you were like, I prepare ahead of time. And I want to dive into maybe like the practical pieces around like what that actually can look like for people.
Yeah, so some really simple things that I use on my short trips that I do is I plan to grocery shop when I get there. So I might be booking my hotel strategically. I'm looking ahead of, am I going to have a car? Am I going to have a ride share? Is there groceries nearby? Am I going to want to use delivery service for groceries? And does my hotel have a refrigerator? Because I tend to do things where I don't tend to eat the breakfasts at the hotel. I tend to eat a little later, or I don't tend to like the choices. So I am often, preparing. I have an idea, I have a list in my phone of, foods, because in travel, I'm like, what do I need to get? Oh yeah. I have my list ready to go. I'm like, yeah, I like to get jerky. I like to get some fruit. I like, like whatever my list of things are. So I don't have to think about it. And then I plan, if I have the time to go grocery shopping, I may look ahead of time at a few restaurant menus. I'm packing things. We talked about sleep already. So I pack my sleep mask. I have earplugs with me. I don't wear earplugs often, but if I'm in a noisy hotel for some reason, noisy neighbors, or I'm right by the elevator or something, I use them. I take tea with me that I prefer. It's comforting. It feels like home. So that's my little connection to home. I have some tea in the evening that helps me wind down if I need it. So I pack some of that ahead of time with me. Some easy snacks I'll take on the plane with me as well. And then I plan, like I do exercise. I tend to exercise more in the room versus going down to the hotel gym. But you might want to think about, like, do you need to take some shoes with you? Do you want to take a swimsuit and some goggles? Do you want to, in that packing stage and having some things planned for yourself?
And prioritizing those things. When you're picking hotels, does the hotel have a nice gym? Do they have running trails nearby? That is my... always like, no, okay, not staying there then. That's not the life that we want to live. And the hotels are getting that. You look at the workout centers now compared to 10 years ago, it is, even at the inexpensive ones. We just happen to always stay at Marriott's because we got the point thing going. Every one of them has that was not true at all just 10 years ago. So the message is getting across, but we still need to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And one of the biggest things that I feel like people don't remember enough is take a refillable water bottle with you. I'm like, why doesn't everybody just automatically do that? I'm not sure, but I see people who don't. Like, take that water bottle with you. You lose so much hydration in a plane. Like you're so dry. And so just being, hydrating and having that, and I don't take those big giant ones that everybody's carrying these days. I want, a 16 ouncer. It can slide easily into my carry-on. I can buy another one if I need it. But, that's really important as well.
Yeah. Some of those might be considered your carry-on, as big as they are.
They'll charge you extra for it now. And I think
for sure,
you all were talking about hotel dynamics and, the idea of being close to the elevator, things we can ask or look for, like asking to get a room away from the elevator or the stairs. It may not happen, but that's within our control, is to ask, seeing, what resources are available. And I know for me, when I travel, I like the hybrid approach of like the adventurous side of me when I travel and wanting to take advantage of that. So I'm not feeling like I'm just in a hotel the whole time. And I'll do that by looking at what like fitness studios are in the area that are close to my hotel. So I can schedule like a workout that's fun, that I'm like getting to be around other people. I'm experiencing a different thing, just to tap into like my own personality too, of like just not wanting to pick up my bags, be at work, and then go home and not feel like I've been in the city, for example. So I think that leaning into our personality too can be helpful when we're thinking about what to pack and prepare.
And, and looking ahead of time, and maybe you aren't somebody who's big into fitness and exercise, but you love museums. Like, you're out, you're walking, you're not sitting on a plane, you're not sitting in meetings anymore, and you're just walking the city, finding a museum or finding something interesting to go do, and you're just moving.
But your point of being intentional about even those things is so valuable, Beth, because I'll just raise my hand and say guilty. All those trips I took, I never did anything. Like, literally, I was there to work. When I wasn't working, I was working in the hotel room, and then I'd go home as soon as possible. And And so I missed opportunities to see baseball games in stadiums that I'll never see. I missed opportunities to, your museum idea is a great example, but had I done that in advance and it was part of what I was scheduling, then of course I would have done it. But in the moment, you're like, oh, I'm tired. I'll just watch a show, go to bed. So
it's so easy to just get wrapped up in what's right in front of you. And that's, it's the same thing like you mentioned going to the grocery store and having that list in my phone. Like, of course I can think of 5 snacks on a dime, but in that moment when you're tired, you've been traveling all day, like I need that boost. And like, oh yeah, a week ago, I looked up 3 things I could do in the city within walking distance of the hotel. Like I've got a couple hours. Let me go do it.
Perfect.
So I feel like we've gotten to this point where, there's this question around practicality. Like, we plan ahead, we've got these ideas. It's a matter of then putting them into practice, right? When we're on our trip. So I'm curious, we packed the bag, we've got our sleep mask, we've got all the things, we've looked at the museums or had these ideas. What would you recommend for how to put them into practice? Like, and see the intention through when we're traveling versus being on autopilot, I would say, when we get on the road.
And that's always the hardest thing is that, we know all the good habits. It's how we put them into place. Yeah. And I tend to do, we talk about schedules, people on the road, they might be appointment oriented and they book it on their calendar, or whether it's a reminder like, hey, don't forget to drink 16 ounces of water this morning. Setting things out in front when you have a routine, if you are a regular traveler, and having a routine of like setting your water bottle right in front of the sink when you go to bed at night. So when you get up, you see it. So doing things that you see it, pull those gym shoes out, lay your clothes out, accountability that we all love with coaching and talking about who can I talk to about this that's going to ask me like, hey, did you get those, 2 runs in this week? Accountability, coaching, of course, hire a coach. And then having some way to bring it front and center for yourself, being kind to yourself. Travel makes it hard. It's not always going to be perfect, but any small step forward is always a progress and trying to do it again next time. Like, all right, I got 1 hotel room workout in this time. I'm going to try for 2 next time, and just bringing that front and center with each of the trips that you do.
Beth, what do you think of retrofitting? That's been my strategy that's helped. So when I land, when I'm at the hotel, I'll retrofit. So I'll look at, okay, the first meeting's at 8, so I need to be back and it's in the same hotel. And so I need to be back and showering by 7:15. So if I want to do an hour run or gym or whatever, that means 6:15. So I need about 15 minutes. Okay, so now it's up at 6. So then retrofitting sleep, that means bed by 10. So basically I'm saying I'm going to my end point of my first commitment is my first work commitment or travel, whatever is at 8. So then I literally will take their little pad of paper and I'll just work backwards and I'll say, okay, so 8, that means 7:15, that means 6, that means 10 p.m. sleep, that means lights out by. So do you do much of that? Because for me, that's incredibly helpful because it puts these mile markers. I don't find myself, oh, how to get to be 11 o'clock? Oops. Now I guess I won't get up early. Literally, now almost first thing I do when I get in the room is retrofit the next day. And then I don't have to think about it. It's just automated.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're making it a priority. You're making fitting that running into your day a priority. You're scheduling it. And then you're taking that next step too. And you're calling it retrofit to kind of time block what the previous 12 to 16 hours are looking like prior to that, because you recognize how sleep is important. And so, yeah, absolutely. When you're scheduling your time, and maybe that feels a little labor intensive to schedule every moment of your day, but that's where I think high performers and effectiveness comes in. And when you have those times protected, like they're your most important client, that, you do get things done. So that's a great example, Brad.
I'm not sure exactly how I want to ask this question, because I'm, we're talking about this ideal vision, right? I feel like around, okay, here's our intention, here's our plan, here's how we execute, check in, have accountability, plug to maybe hire a coach or accountability buddy to help you process it every week or time you go on a trip. And we've got so many professionals who come back and they're just like, I'm drained, or they come back from vacation and they're like, I need a vacation from my vacation. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, like, not what we're doing wrong, but like, what are we doing where we feel like that after a trip versus maybe like, what does it feel like when we have been successful? So maybe starting of like, what are we doing wrong where we feel like we have to have a vacation from a vacation, or a vacation from our work travel for a week?
Yeah. Well, there's two things that come up in my mind. There's jet lag, which we've talked about. And if there's no time zone difference, that is not in place. But, you have to remember jet lag is not just fatigue and sleep disruptions. It can be gut disruptions. And when your gut is disrupted and you're not getting good hydration, all of that plays in. Then you have travel fatigue. Travel fatigue has nothing to do with jet lag. It's just simply the fatigue and mental and physical exhaustion from travel, from the long hours of being in a plane, regardless of time changes. So some of it is, it can be just fatiguing. And there's, you just have to be kind to yourself in that way. And then, so we're not necessarily doing anything wrong. But then there's also just, what you've done during the trip, some things you can't work around. Like I said, the late night banquets and the networking and the scheduling, and, you do the best that you can. But then coming back home and doing all the things that your body needs to the best of your ability is let's get that good night's sleep. Let's get that good nutrition in us again. Let's rehydrate, and going back to those pillars and, paying attention to what your body does actually need and recuperating. But, thinking of it as what did I do wrong? Sure, certainly. I mean, I've been on plenty of vacations where I'm in Turkey one time, I'm here for the week, I'm going to see everything. And I'll deal with it when I come back. And, little bits of that is okay. But yeah, a lifetime of doing that every week is going to have some negative consequences.
Beth, is any part of this expectations? So I know one of the mistakes that Susan and I have both made is when we do the coach training, those are always weekends. And so we work all week and then we go right in Saturday morning and we do the coach training and we're super excited and we love doing these things, but that's all day Saturday and Sunday. And then we step into the office Monday, and Monday night we're laying on the couch, barely able to move. And we're like, what is wrong with us? We didn't get on an airplane. We didn't do and it's like, oh, we never rested this week. We went from one thing to the next. So is there something around the travel of saying the reality is there's only so much in the tank. So when I'm traveling, I need to block out that next morning till noon to go for a walk, to sit on the deck, whatever. But do you recommend some of those things where you talked about block scheduling earlier with your trip? Do you talk about block scheduling around your trip as well? So the half day prior to the trip, the half day after any of those kinds of pieces of advice that might be helpful?
Yeah. And we haven't even talked about, are you an extrovert or are you an introvert? Are these 2 days of long, interactions with, the trainings, filling your cup or draining your cup? I balance between the two. I consider myself an ambivert. And so some of the events that I do, I come back to my hotel and I'm like, I'm not talking to anybody or not doing anything for the next hour. And so sometimes it's building in things. And I had a couple of people I talked to, they were going to a conference where there was a lot of network and they're like, I am so exhausted. I'm like, you know what? How about booking some time in your day to go back to your hotel room, grab lunch, sit by yourself.
Yep.
And you just need to have that quiet time and building that into your days if you're able. Again, a schedule of events, but between you and Suzanne, can you have this is my untouchable 30 minutes. I need to go in and just do a little yoga and some breath work and just have my little break. and doing something like that. How does that land for you, Brad?
Well, I think it's good. And I think we've learned that the hard way. So we try to build that in, and we do tag team when we're at conferences and that kind of thing. I just wondered if you recommend a certain window around those travel, for whether it's play or work. It's still travel. It's still something the body's not used to. It's still stressful moving through time zones. So I didn't know if you had any recommendations specifically around, I kind of recommend prior to a half day and once you get back a half day or something along those lines. Maybe it's by decade. If you're 70, it's this. If you're 40, it's this. If you're 20, it's that. Just any insights along those lines of blocking out in advance this time to recover, knowing it's going to happen. Stop kidding yourself that you're the bionic man, the superwoman, etc. This is reality we're dealing with, unless it's once a year, and then who cares? Be tired. But if this is every 6 months, if this is every 2 months, we need to have realistic expectations.
Yeah. And as far as the amount, that's so individual.
Sure.
I don't have a specific recommendation there, but yeah, talking about that, bringing that up. Hey, how do you feel when you come back from a trip? Is there something within the trip that you can book out for yourself to kind of keep it? And again, is it, is this kind of trip going to fill your cup or deplete you, or, are you too scheduled? But always, if you have the luxury of the morning when you come back to let it be a low key reintroduction to society kind of morning, then do it.
The other question I had for you, and sorry to jump in, Lee, but I was just thinking, are there any trackers that you enjoy using? Do you recommend for reassessment? So it's one thing to go do a trip, come back, say I'm tired, realize, I'm tired, I should do things different. It's another thing to get some data and then say, oh, interesting. So I didn't shift time zones this time, and my HRV did this. Or I did change time zones this time, and my HRV and resting heart rate did that. Do you have some recommendations of things that people might consider monitoring? Because we have so many data tools, and some of them are worthless. I know my Garmin, which is practically brand new, so it's newer modern technology, but its sleep estimate it's ridiculous. Like, it tells me nothing. So that data is worthless, but the morning HRV is precious. It tells me so much. So do you have not through the Garmin, but a different tool. Do you have data that you recommend people consider implementing into their travel reassessment process?
Yeah, I can't say because, I think my tracking tool is probably one of those that doesn't, I don't know that I find it perfectly accurate to how I'm feeling when I do it. So I can't say I've dove into it quite like you do on those. So I can't say that. What I do like, there are a couple apps that help with that time shift with sleep. One is called Time Shifter.
I'm familiar with that one. That's a great one. Yes.
And it helps guide you on things like when to go to bed, when to wake up, if you're using melatonin or if you're using caffeine.
Totally.
And helping you shift. So, I lean a little much more towards those than maybe some of the tracking, the physiology stuff with you.
Perfect.
That you mentioned.
That's a great one. Great recommendation. And that's Time Shifter, everyone, if you didn't get that.
I'm going to throw a rabbit hole question here because I am curious. Woo-hoo! I think I might be biased myself on this, but I'm thinking about when we're sitting on an airplane, and this is probably you putting your PT hat on a little bit. Like we're sitting on an airplane for a couple hours, or we're driving, for work. I'm thinking of people who are just sitting a lot. You mentioned stretches earlier, and I'm curious. I know people aren't going to see this; they're going to be hearing it on the podcast, but what would you recommend for biggest bang for our buck for stretches or feeling more mobile? I just feel like a rock sometimes when I travel. I know other people feel the same. So curious your thoughts on that.
Sure. And there's some feeling better. And then there's things like blood clot prevention. So when you're sitting idle, and dehydrated. Maybe health conditions play into it. Maybe a medication history, a medication you're taking could play into it. So moving every, 1 to 2 hours in some way to keep the blood circulation to help prevent a blood clot in your leg, certainly for the extended travels. And so 2 things: if you can get up, move every 2 hours. If you can't get up and move, squeeze, move, tighten, kind of, depending on where you're confined. I've done some cross country drives. I've been on 14-hour flights. I'm of an age where I'm feeling things stiffen up quite a bit. So yeah, I am doing ankle pumps, toes up, toes down in the seat every hour, half hour. So just tapping your toes, pulling them up and down. If you've got some room to extend a leg, longer legs, middle seats don't always accommodate that, but whatever movement your knee can do, extending it out, pulling it under you, extending it out, doing that 10 times. Squeezing your thighs together, squeezing your buttocks, rolling your shoulders in circles, turning your head left and right. If you're not too cramped, even a little trunk rotation, like turning your body and rotating it left and right, like moving what you can without bugging your neighbor or without wrecking your car, all the things, and just keeping things mobile. And then when you can get up, go ahead and get up. And if you're hydrating well, you're going to need to go to the bathroom at some point. So that's also an opportunity to get up and get moving.
Well, and you can bring a jump rope, you can do some sprints, and no, I'm just kidding. But
you can run up and down the middle section.
Exactly.
Of the
hurdle the food tray. Beth,
well, even long distance drives, you think long distance drives and rest stops and parking lots, those
for
are
sure.
Absolutely great ideas, and utilizing that. And my biggest bang for the buck on anything is hip flexor stretching, so if you can get the front of those hips opened up, that's going to combat a lot of stiffness in the hips, low back pain, things like that from just that prolonged sitting.
But we come back to your original point, and that's intentionality. When you request an aisle seat, you now have all sorts of options. When you take what's given, when you have a whatever, and I get it. I end up in the middle seat plenty of times. But when you have that option, and when you pursue that option, sometimes it's not about having an option. It's about initiating that option. That's a game changer, because when you're in the aisle, it's no big deal to get up every 20 minutes, hour, whatever. And probably not the jump rope thing, but it's easy. When you're in the middle seat, it's this huge life-changing event for the whole row. So it comes back to your original point.
Yeah, we'll all be fighting for aisle seats now.
Exactly. Only listeners to the Coaching Lab podcast.
Yes. And I book aisle seats every time, unless there's some weird circumstance where I have to change a plane and that's all I got is a window or a middle. But yeah, and I've gotten up on, some of the bigger planes where there's a little more room in the back. I've gotten up and done stretches. I've walked the aisles. You do it strategically and be respectful of others. But yeah, it's important. And, compression socks aren't a bad idea either.
Always.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Good things. My husband's not going to be happy when I shift him from the aisle seat to the middle seat. He's 6'3", and I'm 5'4", and guess who sits in the middle seat when we travel? But yeah, like Brad mentioned, just being intentional like that. And Beth, you mentioned too, planning ahead with most of these things, being intentional, thinking about your non-negotiables. Like we talked about sleep of, okay, what is the non-negotiable? Is it 2 to 8? Is it 12 to 4? Is there a little wiggle room that's just for now? It's not long-term. What can we do and be intentional about?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're just planting that seed, even if it's something you don't follow through on. The first step might be remembering it and then going, oh yeah, I need to pack my gym shoes next time. And then the next time it clicks in. And sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to pick, the broiled fish instead of the fried fish this time. And, sometimes things sneak through when you're out.
Well, and let's come back to that real quick. And I know you want to wrap this thing, Lee, as we get close to the hour, but the food choices, I am so stunned by what choice do I have? Well, all the same choices you normally have. Why do you always have to get junk food? Because we're trained that vacation is a chance to let down, and we've translated that into work trips, and we've acted like there's no cost to eating candy bars in the airport and steaks every night for dinner. Have the steak. Don't have it all the time. There's a time and a place for almost everything. It's not all the time, and it's not every place. And we get away from that when it comes to our vacation and our business trips. At least I do personally. And it just takes that intentionality that you've been talking to us about.
Yeah. And the food is a huge, it's your fuel. It's your energy. How are you fueling this trip?
It can be. Or it can be your fall point.
Yeah. And, airports, at least the bigger ones, are getting better about food choices.
There's plenty of options. Just look, people.
Yeah. You may not have all your favorite foods from home, but you'll be able to find some things that are not going to be your drains. They're not going to drag you down. You're going to feel a little more refreshed if you get those fruits and vegetables in you.
Yep. I was playing the world's smallest violin as she was saying that. Everybody, you can't see it, but they were seeing it.
I would say, it comes back to just research too. Like, I think I've talked to some people before where they're like, I didn't realize that TSA would let me take a granola bar through security. TSA has yet to take my granola bars when I go through security, but I think it's just looking, right? I mean, I know things change, but chances are you're allowed to take a granola bar through, but look at the TSA website, but just do some research, planning ahead, seeing what you can take advantage of. Like we talked about the aisle seat, just see what's available and continue to experiment as along the way.
And experimenting is great. I've done some experimenting with, like, can I take a frozen yogurt through TSA? It's no longer liquid. I've had success with that. I don't know if that's going to be 100% thing, but yeah, I pack meals and take them with me. I just am careful of the liquids. I've frozen a few things. They're not always thawed when I want to eat them, but having some food with you also saves a few dollars.
100%. The chomps at the USA Today in the airports, way more expensive than the chomps at the grocery store.
Hello.
Yeah. Well, Beth, as we wrap up, I had this one last question, the kind of biggest bang for your buck. So if listeners could take just one mindset shift or habit into their next work trip, what would it be?
I can only pick one. I feel like we talked about so many great ones. The biggest is planning, thinking ahead of time and planning, whatever the avenue, whatever the pillar that is most important to you, whether that's sleep, food, exercise, stress, connection, plan a little ahead of time and then do your best to implement that on your way.
Sounds like a plan. Thanks for joining us for this conversation with Beth Jennings. As someone who used to travel a lot for work and found it at times to be pretty disruptive, this episode provided some really valuable insights and strategies, and I had a lot of fun in the conversation. If you found this episode valuable, we'd love for you to share it with a friend or leave a review. It helps us continue bringing these conversations to you. And as always, thank you so much for being part of the Coaching Lab and Catalyst community. We'll see you in the next episode. Or if you want to connect sooner, reach out at results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com.